Hi, I'm Kristin Omdahl. I'm a creative entrepreneur embracing every aspect of life with artistic intention. Join me as I share the way I live and all the tips and tricks along the way. Allow me to inspire you to do the same. Please like, share, or comment on my videos. I'd love to hear from you. And if you subscribe to my channel, you'll be first to know when there's something new. I'm going to show you how to make this really simple lace shawl today. I know it doesn't look simple. It looks very complicated, but I'm going to show you with a few very simple stitches how to make this stitch pattern and how to change color for the stripes. So let's get started. The 2 skein project with Be So Sporty, my sport weight yarn. This one was with Jaded Peacock and Harbor Fog, and for the sample today in the video, I'm going to show you Pink Damask and Parisian Bordeaux together. We're going to start by casting on, and because this shawl is worked lengthwise, meaning we cast on for the long edge and work short and cast off the long edge, you want to make sure that your cast on and bind off are equally stretchy. And in lace, I like to do a really stretchy lace bind off, which means I need to find a way to replicate that for the cast on. And the best way I can do that is with knitted cast on. So what I do is start with a slip knot, and then you want to cinch it snug onto your needle. And then what we're going to do is almost knit this stitch. What we're going to do is insert our needle into the loop on the left hand needle, yarn around the right hand needle, and pull up a loop. But instead of pulling this one off the left hand needle, we're going to add the new one to the left hand needle. So now we have 2 stitches. We're going to knit cast on again. So insert our right hand needle into the loop on our left hand needle, yarn over the needle and pull up a loop and insert it onto the left hand needle. So we now have 3 stitches cast on. And then we're going to do that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We'll start with 12 stitches. Also, I want to show you on the finished shawl that we did a selvage edge, and what that means is we did the first 5 stitches in garter stitch before beginning our lace pattern. So what I'll do today, because we're doing a smaller sample of that, is I'll do that for 2 stitches at the beginning and end of each row. But the first 2 rows of the shawl is to just knit across. And that's simple enough. I'm sure you already know how to do the knit stitch, which is just insert your needle with your yarn and back through the front of the loop on the left hand needle, pull up a loop and slide it off. And we'll slow that down in case you haven't done the knit stitch before. We're going to insert, with our yarn and back, we're going to insert our needle into the front of the loop on the left hand needle, yarn over your right hand needle, pull it through the loop, and then slide it off the left hand as you're sliding the new one onto the right hand needle. Okay, so the stitch pattern is going to start with, we're going to do 2 stitches in garter selvage, which means we're going to knit the first 2 stitches, and then the first row of the patterning row is to yarn over and knit 1 in each stitch across. So in essence, you're doubling your stitches on this row. minus the 2 selvage stitches. In the pattern, it's actually 5. But you'll understand that once you see the pattern. I'm just showing you the stitch pattern today. Okay, so the pattern is yarn over, knit 1, and then we'll do our 2 selvage stitches at the end. Next row is to knit our first 2 selvage stitches, and then we're going to purl across this row. So we move our yarn to the front, and we're going to purl the stitches and the yarn overs the same way. When it says purl across in the pattern, it means regardless of whether it's a stitch or a yarn over, you purl across all of them. Same goes for a knit across. But this row is to purl across all of those stitches, which is double what we actually cast on. And the pattern states that too. On the rows where you have extra stitches, it does state how many it's supposed to be, so you can keep count of that as well. And then we'll knit our last 2 selvage stitches. Now on this row, we're going to decrease back down to our original stitch count. We're going to knit the first 2 stitches, and now we're going to knit 2 together across the row. What that means is you're going to insert your right hand needle into the fronts of the next 2 stitches together. Yarn over your needle, pull up a new stitch, and slide both of those off of your left hand needle. That is a knit 2 together. Sometimes it helps me, and it might help you too, to give a little tug to the body of your work. If you're having trouble getting into those stitches, giving a little tug to the stitches below it will elongate the stitches so that you can get your needle in there nicely. That really helps me on decreased stitches, like a knit 2 together, or knit 3 together, or what have you. So we're going to decrease all the way across until we get to our selvage stitches. And we'll just knit those 2 stitches regular. Okay, on to the next row. The next 2 rows are identical. We're going to start with our knit 2 selvage stitches, and then across the row it's going to be a yarn over, knit 2 together. And if you notice, we add a stitch and decrease a stitch, so on this row we're not changing our stitch count at all. We're balancing our increases and decreases by doing a yarn over and a knit 2 together side by side. So you want to do that across till you get to your last 2 selvage stitches, and we'll just knit those 2 regular. Okay, remember I said this is the row that we're going to do twice in a row, so now we're going to repeat knit 2 selvage stitches, and now we're going to repeat yarn over, knit 2 together across. So you'll be knitting a yarn over and knit 2 together from the previous row when you're knitting 2 together this time, which is a little bit different. Yarn over, knit 2 together, repeat across to the last 2 stitches, and we'll knit those 2 regular. Okay, so now we're going to turn our work, and the last 2 rows of the stitch pattern are just to knit across. So we'll knit across both of these rows evenly, the selvage stitches and every stitch, and yarn over, they're all counted the same. Okay, and then one more row. It was 2 rows of knit across. Okay, and then I'm going to show you one way for changing yarn that some people might think is cheating, and I have to tell you that I don't have a problem with it at all. If you want to do something more invisible, that's fine, but let me show you what I did on the sample here, and that is that on every round that I changed color, I carried my tails along for the selvage stitches, and honestly, once you block it and weave in the ends after that, I don't see it. So I thought it was a very, very simple way to join yarns and not have to tie any knots. So I'm going to cut the yarn about 5 inches, and I'm going to grab my new color. And so for my first stitch, we're going to wrap the new yarn around the needle, and so the first stitch is just knit with the new yarn. Then I'm going to grab the tail of the first yarn, Parisian Bordeaux, the tail of the new yarn, Pink Damask, and the tail and the working yarn of the new yarn, Pink Damask, and knit with all 3 of them. Now in the sample, we have 5 stitches in knit for the selvage, and so you would carry those extra tails for those 5 stitches. In the sample here, we don't, so pretend like we did all 3 of those strands for 5 stitches, but now I'm going to switch to just my working yarn for the actual pattern after the selvage is done. So we're going to switch to now just Pink Damask in the first row, which is now a repeat. We've already done everything once, is a yarn over, knit 1. This is that increase row where we increase all of our stitches. So yarn over, knit 1 all the way across to our selvage stitches. The really cool part about this pattern is even if you did it in one color, it's absolutely reversible, and not because the pattern is necessarily identical on both sides, but because the pattern is a 7-row repeat. So because it's an odd number of repeat, you can't help but be identical on both sides, because every time you repeat the pattern, every other one is going to be right side faces versus wrong side facing. What I thought was interesting to do with the striping is that I would stripe after every change, and I thought that was really interesting how you can change with the different repeats, and it looks so cool. It looks so much more complicated than it really is. Okay, so our next row is to knit the 2 selvage stitches, then we're going to knit 2 together across the row. And then knit our last 2 selvage stitches. And turn our work and back down to our original stitch count again, and we're going to knit 2. And now we begin our yarn over, knit 2 together. 2 rows. This is the first one of the 2. And we'll knit 2 selvage stitches, and our second row of yarn over, knit 2 together. And then we're down to our last 2 rows of the repeat, which is to knit across. So on that first row of knit across, remember that means to knit the stitches and the yarn overs equally. They all count as a stitch. Okay, our last row of knit across for this stripe. And now it's time to change yarns again. And here's another thing that I think is really cool about the way you change yarns in this pattern. Normally when you stripe something and you change it every repeat, you would have your tails at the end of the same side all along. So if you were going to have bulk from weaving in your ends, it would only be on the one side. But because this is an odd number repeat, an odd number of rows for each stripe, you're going to alternate which side you do the weaving in of the ends and the tails. So I think that that's another way that it just looks a little more obscure. So we're going to cut that yarn about 5 inches. We're going to add our new one, and I'll show you my little cheat method again, which, like I said, will look way more invisible when you're doing it over 5 stitches in the selvage. But right now we're going to do it over 2. So we start with our working yarn, and then holding the tails of our working yarn and our cut yarn or the tails of both our cut yarn and our working yarn with our working yarn, and now we're going to knit the next stitch. And you would do that for all 5 of the selvage stitches. So now I'm going to drop the tails of Parisian Bordeaux and Pink Damask, and I'm going to begin the first row of the lace stitch pattern, which is yarn over, knit 1 across. And a reminder, this is also our increase row, so this is where you're going to double your stitches for a little bit. And then knit your last 2 selvage stitches. This row is to knit 2 and then purl across, yarn over, or yarn to the front, and purl each stitch and yarn over individually. Each one counts as its own stitch. If those tails are a little bit loose, you just want to give them a little pull, but once you do it over 5 stitches of selvage, it won't be as loose as it is right now. Okay, next row is to knit the first 2 selvage stitches, and we're going to knit 2 together across the row. We're going to decrease all the way around, all the way across to come back to our original stitch count. So we'll knit 2 together. Remember, tug on your work if you need to elongate those stitches to make room for your needle to get in there. It's one of my favorite little tips. Before I figured that out, it used to stress me out to do decreases. Not anymore. Okay, so now we'll turn our work. And the next 2 rows are identical. It's knit your selvage stitches, and then yarn over, knit 2 together. Yarn over, knit 2 together. You want to do that across the entire row. Knit 2. And we'll repeat that row one more time. Yarn over, knit 2 together. Remember, this time we're going to be working 2 stitches together that are a yarn over and a stitch from the previous row, so it's a little bit different. Yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 together, and knit our last 2 selvage stitches. The last 2 rows are exactly the same as they were in the other 2 stripes. We're just going to knit plain all the way across. So once you finish those last 2 rows with me, and I'll show you how to do my favorite loose lacy bind off. Okay, our repeat is done and we're ready to do our Lacy Bind Off to replicate which is really stretchy, to replicate our stretchy cast on, which was in knit cast on. So we're going to start with knitting the first stitch, and then we're going to yarn over and knit the second stitch. Now, to bind off, what you want to do is pick up that yarn over and first stitch together and pull them up, over, and off the needle, leaving the second stitch on your right hand needle. We're going to yarn over, and that's all we do now. So we're going to repeat that across. Yarn over, knit one, pick up the yarn over and the first stitch, pull them up, over, and off the needle from the second stitch. Yarn over, knit the next stitch on the left hand needle, bring it to the right, insert your left hand needle into the first stitch and the yarn over, pull them over the second stitch and off the needle. You'll be amazed at how stretchy and loose this bind off is. It's wonderful for lace. It's wonderful for the edge of a shawl. Because I do so much lace knitting, it's by far my favorite and easiest bind off technique. If I were doing more dense stitches, obviously I wouldn't like it, but because of the type of knitting I like to do, it's absolutely my favorite bind off technique. So you should do that across the entire row until you get to the last stitch. And now we'll just cut the yarn as normal and fasten off our last stitch. And I'll show this to you side by side with the finished shawl. And you can see what a difference the blocking is going to make. See how much looser the stitches are and how much more negative space you have with the lace. So this one will stretch out like, let's see, get the tails out of the way. This one will stretch out like that when it's done. Gosh, I really like these two colors together too. Anyways, that's how to do this 7-row reversible lace stitch pattern with stripes and 2 colors of yarn.